They say a U.S. passport opens every door, but by 2025, that might no longer be true. Once welcoming nations across Asia are now slamming their borders shut to Americans. Number 1. China. Once one of the most visited countries by American tourists, business travelers, and students, China in 2025 has become increasingly closed to U.S. citizens. The doors aren't just shutting quietly, they're slamming. What used to be a challenging but manageable visa process has now turned into a geopolitical wall. Tensions between Washington and Beijing have reached a boiling point. Trade wars, tech bans, accusations of espionage, and military standoffs in the South China Sea have all poisoned diplomatic ties. As a result, China has tightened entry requirements specifically for American citizens. Visas are now frequently delayed, denied, or simply not issued at all, especially for journalists, NGO workers, dual citizens, and those affiliated with government agencies or the military. In some cases, even approved visas have been revoked at the last minute. Travelers report heightened scrutiny at Chinese airports, phone checks by border agents, and interrogations about past travel history or political affiliations. Tourists who once roamed Beijing streets freely now risk being followed, questioned, or worse, detained. American universities have canceled student exchanges, and business trips are being redirected to other countries. Even tech giants like Apple and Tesla are rethinking their China strategies due to rising instability and legal threats. What once was the world's largest tourist magnet has become a restricted zone, at least for Americans. Number 2. North Korea. If there's one country in Asia where Americans have absolutely no chance of entering in 2025, it's North Korea. The border isn't just closed, it's fortified, and the message is clear. U.S. citizens are not welcome under any circumstances. For years, travel to North Korea has been heavily restricted. However, after multiple nuclear tests, rising tensions on the Korean peninsula, and the collapse of diplomatic talks, the U.S. government itself has banned its citizens from traveling to North Korea without special approval, which is almost never granted. But even if someone wanted to go, North Korea wouldn't have it. The regime sees Americans not as tourists but as potential spies, saboteurs, or political leverage. Past incidents, like the tragic case of Otto Warmbier, have made it brutally clear that entering North Korea as a U.S. citizen can be a one-way trip. In 2025, the risks are even higher. Detentions, forced confessions, and public trials are used as propaganda tools. There are no embassies, no consular protections, and no escape routes. Even humanitarian workers and peace activists are routinely denied entry or closely surveilled during rare pre-approved visits. Flights into Pyongyang from friendly nations like China or Russia no longer sell seats to Americans. Travel companies that once specialized in North Korea tourism have dropped U.S. clients entirely. The regime has made it official policy: no Americans, no exceptions. Number 3. Iran. In 2025, Iran is no longer just difficult for Americans to visit, it's nearly impossible. What used to require a complex visa process and special tour arrangements has now become a diplomatic dead end. The door is closed, and it's not reopening anytime soon. Tensions between the United States and Iran have reached new highs. After years of nuclear disputes, sanctions, cyber attacks, and proxy conflicts across the Middle East, both nations have pulled farther apart. Diplomatic relations remain frozen, and Iranian authorities view American citizens with deep suspicion, regardless of their purpose for travel. Even before the current crisis, Americans could only visit Iran through heavily restricted, government-approved tours. Now, that option is gone. Tour operators refuse to accept U.S. passport holders, citing risks of interrogation, surveillance, and even arrest. The Iranian government has openly warned that any U.S. citizen entering the country could face espionage charges, regardless of their intentions. Dual nationals, especially Iranian Americans, face the greatest danger. Several have been detained in recent years, used as leverage in political negotiations, or left trapped in legal limbo for months. There are no U.S. embassies in Tehran. If something goes wrong, there's no one to help. Even transiting through Iran on international flights has become a red flag. American passports trigger extra screening, delayed visas in neighboring countries, and questions from global immigration agents. Number 4. Afghanistan. Once the center of U.S. military operations and international aid, Afghanistan in 2025 is a country completely closed off to American travelers, not just by policy but by danger. Since the fall of Kabul and the Taliban's return to power, the country has transformed into one of the most hostile environments for U.S. citizens. After the U.S. withdrawal, diplomatic ties collapsed. The U.S. embassy was shut down, and visas stopped being issued. American NGOs, journalists, and aid organizations were forced to evacuate. What was once a zone of strategic cooperation became a no-go zone for anyone holding a U.S. passport. Today, Taliban authorities do not welcome American visitors under any circumstance. Anyone entering Afghanistan as a U.S. citizen, even with humanitarian intentions, risks immediate detention, interrogation, or worse. The Taliban have made it clear Americans are seen not as civilians but as representatives of a country they still openly resent. Multiple terror groups now operate freely within Afghan borders, including factions openly hostile to the West. Without diplomatic protections, consular services, or secure transit routes, there is no safe way in and no guaranteed way out. Journalists, former aid workers, and dual nationals are at particular risk. Even nearby countries discourage American travelers from approaching Afghan border zones. Airlines avoid Afghan airspace altogether, and travel insurers won't offer coverage. Number 5. Pakistan. In 2025, visiting Pakistan as an American has become a high-risk move, if not outright impossible. What was once a difficult but navigable visa process has turned into a maze of rejections, delays, and silent denials. For many U.S. citizens, especially journalists, aid workers, and solo travelers, the answer is now simply no. Rising geopolitical tensions have poisoned the relationship between Islamabad and Washington. Drone strikes, accusations of espionage, intelligence leaks, and ongoing unrest in border regions have pushed trust to a breaking point. As a result, Pakistan has dramatically reduced visa approvals for Americans, and many are quietly blacklisted without explanation. Even those who are granted entry often face intense scrutiny at airports, constant surveillance, and travel restrictions within the country. In some cases, Americans have been detained for photographing sensitive areas or for social media posts deemed offensive. Entire provinces, including regions near Afghanistan or Kashmir, are off-limits, and venturing there can trigger interrogation or expulsion. Dual nationals fare no better. Pakistani Americans report being harassed, placed on watch lists, or denied exit without clear cause. The absence of transparency makes travel not just difficult but dangerous. U.S. government travel advisories now classify much of Pakistan as "do not travel." Insurance companies have pulled coverage, commercial airlines have reduced flight options, and local tour operators refuse to work with Americans. Number 6. Turkmenistan. Turkmenistan has never been an easy country to visit, but in 2025, it's practically sealed off. And for American citizens, the door is locked tighter than ever. Known as one of the most secretive and authoritarian regimes in the world, Turkmenistan treats all foreign visitors with suspicion. But for U.S. passport holders, the situation has reached a dead end. Officially, Turkmenistan has a visa process, but in reality, almost all applications from Americans are denied or left unanswered. Tourists must apply through tightly controlled, state-run agencies, submit detailed itineraries, and agree to constant surveillance. Even then, approval is rare, and for U.S. citizens, nearly impossible. Number 7. Myanmar. Once a promising destination for travelers and humanitarian workers alike, Myanmar in 2025 has become a nation under lockdown. Politically, militarily, and diplomatically, for American citizens, the country is now nearly impossible to enter, and doing so carries serious personal risk. After the military coup in 2021, Myanmar spiraled into chaos. Civil war, violent crackdowns, and international condemnation followed. The United States imposed sanctions, suspended many forms of cooperation, and openly supported pro-democracy efforts. In response, the ruling junta cut ties with Western nations, especially the United States. Tourism collapsed. The military government now views American visitors with hostility, associating them with opposition movements, foreign interference, and intelligence gathering. Visas for U.S. passport holders are rarely granted, and when they are, they come with strict limitations, close monitoring, and the constant threat of detainment. Journalists and NGO workers have been detained, deported, or even imprisoned without trial. Some have simply disappeared. Independent travel is unsafe, with checkpoints, curfews, and military patrols common even in major cities. Entire regions are off-limits, especially those where ethnic conflicts and armed resistance movements continue. There is no functioning U.S. embassy in Myanmar. If something goes wrong, there is no one to call. Airlines have slashed international routes, and local operators refuse to work with Americans, citing government pressure and fear of retribution. Number 8. Syria. Syria may lie on the western edge of Asia, but in 2025, it represents one of the most dangerous places on Earth, and for American citizens, it's completely off-limits. The country remains shattered by over a decade of war, political collapse, and international isolation. If you hold a U.S. passport, Syria doesn't want you, and neither do the armed groups inside it. The U.S. and Syrian governments haven't had formal diplomatic relations for years after multiple military interventions, sanctions, and accusations of regime change efforts. The Syrian state sees American citizens not as travelers but as symbols of foreign aggression. There is no visa, no consulate, and no protection. Even journalists and humanitarian workers are turned away or denied entry entirely. Those who enter unofficially through border zones in Iraq or Lebanon risk arrest, torture, or being used as bargaining chips by local militias. Several extremist groups still operate inside the country and have a history of detaining or executing Westerners, especially Americans. The Syrian government itself has detained dual nationals and used them as political pawns. Crossing the border, even with Arab heritage or family ties, doesn't guarantee safety. There are no functioning embassies, no exit routes if something goes wrong, and no international organizations that can guarantee your release. Airlines no longer fly into Damascus from the west. U.S. travel advisories explicitly list Syria as, "do not travel under any circumstances." Number 9. Yemen. In 2025, Yemen is not just closed to American travelers, it's actively dangerous, chaotic, and nearly impossible to enter legally. Once known for its ancient cities and dramatic landscapes, Yemen has become a symbol of collapse. For U.S. citizens, the risks are too great, and the welcome no longer exists. Years of civil war, foreign intervention, famine, and disease have turned Yemen into a humanitarian disaster zone. Multiple factions control different parts of the country, including groups openly hostile to the United States. The U.S. Embassy in Sana'a closed long ago, and diplomatic ties have never been re-established. This means there's no consular support, no safe zones, and no exit strategy if something goes wrong. American citizens are viewed with suspicion by both state and non-state actors. Number 10. Bhutan. Bhutan once welcomed travelers with open arms, as long as they followed its strict tourism model: low volume, high value, and full cultural respect. But in 2025, Americans are finding it harder than ever to gain entry, and for many, the answer is now simply no. After the pandemic, Bhutan completely overhauled its tourism system. The country raised its sustainable development fee, implemented strict entry conditions, and began selectively approving visitors based on nationality, travel history, and perceived diplomatic friendliness. For American travelers, visas have become extremely rare, especially for solo tourists or independent backpackers. What changed? Bhutan has grown increasingly cautious about outside influence. With rising tensions between the US and China, two powers that dominate regional politics, Bhutan has chosen strategic neutrality, leaning closer to regional neighbors like India. As a result, Americans now face long processing times, opaque approval procedures, and unexplained rejections. The U.S. has no embassy in Bhutan. All diplomatic communication must go through India, making the process even more difficult. Travelers are required to book government-approved guides, prepay expensive fees, and provide detailed itineraries. Even then, approval is never guaranteed. Bhutan's emphasis on preserving culture, limiting tourism impact, and avoiding political entanglement makes U.S. visitors increasingly unwelcome. Tour operators now prioritize tourists from countries with closer diplomatic ties. Some have even stopped accepting American bookings altogether.